This is my '09 XB12R, and this bike has three major things that I hate about it. And usually with a motorcycle I would do 5 things or 10 things that I hate about it, and they'd be smaller things. But in reality, there's not really too many smaller things that I dislike about the bike, but there's 3 major things that irk me about the bike that either I experience on a daily basis while riding or just in the ownership in general. A couple videos ago I did 5 things that I love about this bike, so make sure to check that out after you watch this video. Getting right into it, the first thing that I dislike about the bike is the cheapness of the parts used on it. If you don't know anything about Buell and this is your first time watching, this is a Harley collaboration with one of their head engineers at the time who decided to go racing. And to give Harley and Buell a little bit of a break in terms of why they might have used some of the things that they did and the cheap materials, it was meant to go racing at the end of the day and not really meant to be a street model. But the things that they did use and common issues people do have with these bikes are a lot of electrical problems and hardware related things. That's my biggest concern and problem with the bike is the hardware that Buell used in the bikes, especially under the seat here, was very, very cheap. Now, anytime you have to work on the bike you use, you have to take a lot of this stuff apart. It's a sports bike, that's just a life with them and no problems with that. But the thing is, underneath the seat, there's a few bolts. And these bolts, from the torque of an Allen key, instead of coming out, strip the head of the bolt because they're so cheap. And that's something that, we've opened the Buell a couple of times now, maybe a dozen times at the very most. And those bolts, both of them, are beginning to strip. The threads of the bolts also aren't really proper. Now, I'm not sure if it's the thread or if it is actually the bike itself where the thread goes into, but it doesn't really want to match up, and you can't switch the bolts. You have to have the left side bolt on the left side and the right side bolt on the right side. Because if you don't, they won't go in and they'll strip the threads. So it's fantastic, right? And then we've taken off this tank cover here, or breather cover here, as you may want to call it. And these bolts are already starting to see their wear. Once or twice it's come out, no more than that. And it's crazy to me that something that's going to be used so much and taken apart when doing services, battery, whatever the case is, has such cheap hardware on it. Not only that, but going back to the other point about wiring, a lot of issues with these bikes were wiring related. A lot of people had electronic issues, and when I had my electronic issues a couple of months ago, I was reading forums and there was tons of people complaining about the wiring of these bikes, saying it was too thin, saying it was too skinny, saying just a bunch of things about it and the quality of the parts. Now, my negative terminal was shaken loose from my motorcycle's vibration. That caused a wire to burn and a connector to burn. So it's not 100% the bike's cheap wiring fault, but I know that's a major issue with these bikes. And another thing is the rear indicators and the front indicators. Now, the front indicators are tucked in to the bikes a lot more than the rear were. As you can see here, I have aftermarket rear indicators because the original ones stuck out so far, and from the vibration of the bike and maybe from occasionally bumping into them a few times as well. I will admit it's not strictly from the vibration, and there might have been some human contact with it as well. But from that and the vibration of the bike, both sides cracked. We try to put them back together, we try to repair them, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't worth it because they're just going to crack again. And that's just something I didn't really understand of why they used some of the parts that they did. But I guess it's not a Honda and it's a Buell. It's a Harley. And I'm used to the Honda quality, which is fantastic, and one of the reasons why I love Honda. Inner Honda fanboy coming out. But moving on to the next point, the second thing I hate about it is actually the biggest thing and the biggest concern I have on a consistent basis of riding this bike. And it's the fact that it shakes and it's very, very raw and a little bit too raw to be enjoyable. And by that I mean it shakes so much because of the V-twins vibrations, and the front end doesn't have any type of dampening on it whatsoever, and you can see the rake is a very, very small minimal angle, which means if you're going at very low speeds, instead of the bike leaning with the corner, you're more muscling the bike into corners at low speeds, and it almost feels like the bike wants to throw you off of it. Especially if you're a new rider and you don't have any experience with this bike whatsoever, you could get yourself into some tricky situations. At higher speeds, the bike becomes a little bit more manageable, and maybe that's one of those things because it's a race bike. It was like, America, raw power, let's do it, who needs dampening? And not only that, but recession time as well. So they never added a steering damper to the bike, and it needs one. It needs one pretty desperately. With a steering damper, this bike would be fantastic. A lot of you guys in the comments who own these bikes or have ridden them have the same consensus that it really needs one because the vibration and the feeling at low speeds is crazy. By low speeds, I mean anything under 45 miles per hour. Going 60, 65 on some of these back roads, the bike handles phenomenally. Honestly, while riding, that's my biggest thing about the bike, is just that minor little thing that they could have tweaked. And in the future, I do plan to add it, but just when I do, I don't know. I'd have to figure out a way to do it because I believe it has to be mounted to the body, and I think a few other people have done it, so I'll figure it out. With that being said, let's move on to thing number 3, and it's the fact that there's no support for this bike whatsoever anymore. Any part that you want to get is pretty much going to be either aftermarket, used, and if you're really lucky, you might be able to find some backstock that someone had bought and still hasn't used to this day. All support for Buell from Harley has basically been cut. Harley dealerships, for the most part, from what I hear, do not want to work on Buells, which is fine because dealers, they're going to upcharge and upsell and do all of those things because they're dealers, but there's no way to just go to Harley and go get some simple parts that you might need for your bike, which is one of the many things that I love about other brands, that they still support some of the older models. You can go and walk into a dealership and you can go get the parts. Now, I live in a place where we don't even have a Harley dealership anymore, so I wouldn't be able to do that. Now, I'm lucky that I am in Wisconsin. These bikes are from Wisconsin. Harley is from Wisconsin, and though I don't have a Harley dealership in my town anymore because it closed down, the neighboring towns who do have the Harley dealerships, they will work on these bikes and they will touch them, but they can't get parts for them, so they're going to be even more expensive than going to other places if you want anything other than simple servicing done. Now, there are aftermarket parts for these bikes, aftermarket fuel pumps, and everything under the sun that you can get for them, so it's not like you're screwed if you buy these bikes, but you might have to play around a little bit with the lotto, I guess, and see if some of the parts are even worth buying, because I'm sure there's bad Chinese garbage parts out for these bikes that you're going to have to weed through in order to get through some decent parts. It's always nice to be able to go to a manufacturer and buy parts, which you can't for this bike anymore. But I don't know who owns the rights to it anymore, who owns the rights to the parts, who owns the right to manufacturing, distribution, sale, whatever. Because as far as I know, Eric Buell, when he did branch off from Harley and Harley canned the brand, he didn't take the Buell brand with him, and I think Harley still owns the rights, but I highly doubt that Eric Buell would want Harley to sell the parts because he probably wouldn't get money from. There's a long story, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. It'd be interesting to see some support for these bikes to come back. With that being said, those are the 3 biggest complaints I have about this bike, things I've ran into, issues I've had with it, and a little bit of just about this bike, right? Because it has a lot of and those 3 things are the biggest things for me. Let me know what things you dislike/hate about the bike in the comment section down below. If you own one or have had any experience with them. If you want to know 5 things that I love about the bike, click here, watch it, and well, I think you'd enjoy it. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video while you're there as well.